A warm welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Looks like we're back at square one with the situation in the Middle East as the United States and Iran have been exchanging airstrikes since Tuesday last week. U.S. President Donald Trump said the U.S. had hit Iran very hard for a second successive night on Wednesday in retribution for Tehran's strikes on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. He had said he was uncertain whether the latest strikes indicate a return to all-out war, but assured the U.S. would win very quickly, if so.
I don't know. We'd win it very quickly. It's another way of doing it. We have many ways we can win, but we've already won militarily. They have very little. They have very little left, and they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago. They want to make a deal so badly.
During a press conference on the sidelines of the NATO meeting in Ankara, Turkey, the U.S. president defended his sharp critic of Iran. He even cast doubt on whether he still wanted a deal with Tehran after the fresh strikes and renewed accusations of ceasefire violations.
Based on their actions over the last week or two, they're not doing a service to the people. And I think more than anything else is I got to know them. And I'm not sure I want to make a deal with them. We can play games, but I'm not sure I want to make a deal. I just finished the job.
Now, both the U.S. and Iran have blamed each other for breaking earlier agreements outlined in the MOU, which initiated a 60-day peace negotiation process 3 weeks ago. Wednesday marked the third time the U.S. was launching major attacks on Iran while talks are ongoing. That's something Tehran says has caused trust to break down. Fast forward to Sunday, July 12, and the U.S. launched a fresh wave of strikes in response to Iranian forces hitting a ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps then said it had closed the Strait of Hormuz until further notice and launched attacks on U.S. bases and allies in the region. It said it had hit a U.S. base in Jordan, while the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain all responded to missiles and drones from Iran. But member of the Iranian Parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee, Abolfazi Zurevand, said the strait could be fully operational within an hour if Washington abandoned its adventurism and engaged honestly. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baqai says his country has not requested to negotiate with the United States, while reiterating that Tehran did not reject the request of one of the regional mediators to travel to Iran and discuss the latest situation. Baqai also referred to the visit of a Qatari mediator to Mashhad on Friday, saying Tehran had conveyed its points of views and perspectives to the Qatari side. While the strikes intensified between the U.S. and Iran, I spoke to Channel Television's energy correspondent, Olu Phillips, about what to expect with oil prices in the coming days.
Let me explain this with something that we can relate with. Our office is situated off the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and that expressway has been described as one of the busiest in Africa, especially in Nigeria, as it were. So imagine what happens if the Kara Bridge gets blown up. It means that all the goods and services, cattle, vegetables, all the food that you see in most of the big markets in Lagos can't come in. And what that simply means is that it begins to create artificial scarcity. So people will need all of these things in Lagos and other parts of the state, but they can't come in from other parts of the country, so because that bridge is blown. That's what's happening with this conflict between the U.S. and Iran. The Strait of Hormuz, yes, it may not have direct impact in terms of whether our oil flows through there or the refined products flow back from there, because we have a refinery here that's taking care of some of our needs. Our export may not necessarily go through there, but countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates have their products in and out in terms of crude, raw crude, and finished products coming out from there going to refineries. And you say, what's the connection? And why does prices have to always go up when these things happen? It goes up because we are trading an international commodity. So these prices, if for instance Dangote needs to buy from even And that international price is already suffering a strain with all of this bombing. So if I can get my ship to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, then it means there's scarcity, there's a fallback, there's pressure on insurance, especially for them that are situated around United Kingdom and all of that. So if I can get through, scarcity, they say, creates wants and increases value. So the value of what crude trades at becomes expensive. And petrol, which is a derivative, aviation fuel, which is a derivative, diesel, which is a derivative of some of these petroleum products or petroleum commodity, becomes expensive, including other derivatives like petrochemical, your bitumen, all of that, because they all come from crude and the family of crude. So that's why each time Daddy Trump says something or does something, we suffer some of these things, and not because of what he's done.
In other words,
because of the effect of those conflicts, which is coming out from this conflict.
In other words, Olu, we should expect an increase in oil prices as well as the pump prices of fuel. But in another development, I'm learning also that oil reserves on some of the biggest players around the world is drying up, and there's an even bigger crisis looming ahead for the rest of the world. How true is this?
Is it good to say that we rejoice, or we should rejoice that something like this is happening? I don't know why. I don't know if I can say we should rejoice from a bad situation, but Nigeria is already plugging into those gaps. For instance, Nigeria oil companies are beginning to step up to that effect where they want to close in that gap. Yesterday, the Minister for Petroleum Resources, Oil, Senator Heineken Lokobiri, announced that Nigeria now produces 1.8 million barrels of crude that includes condensate. What that also tells you is that some of the deals that have been signed this week during the Energy Week in Abuja here suggest that there are more molecules coming in. For instance, Renaissance has discovered oil where they'll be getting about a new oil well where they'll be producing and prospecting something around the JK004. We have several other companies that have signed on. And the derivatives, for instance, if we can't use petroleum products in terms of, say, crude, fuel, we can use non-associated gas, and Nigerian companies are developing those reserves strongly in such a way that there's a commitment for domestic gas supply where if they produce this gas, it first of all fits Nigeria, and somehow we get that buffer and become a bit insulated from what's happening globally necessarily, and we get that value. So whilst it's shrinking out there internationally, Nigeria seems to be very blessed and positioned to develop some of these things, and it's beginning to happen. The molecules have been unlocked and the deals have been signed. Today alone, as you will see in our 10 o'clock news today, our flagship, over $2 billion worth of MOUs have been signed, and all of this will be unlocking potentials, unlocking reality, unlocking molecules. And if Nigeria can continue to enhance and go on this trajectory, we might just be and become one of the greatest and richest nations in the world.
Yes, so that will put us in as an advantage, but we will still end up paying more for petroleum, right?
If you take the advantage that comes from other derivatives of the product, that may not necessarily involve you buying the derivative called petrol, then you have your lives enhanced. For instance, Norway today, the major cities of Norway by way of policy, does 90% of electric cars, does about 80% or 85% of energy that is sourced from other means other than hydrocarbon. So if Nigeria does this and sells, you make more money from terms of revenue, invest this money into non-renewables, and so Nigeria balances out. You have the product to sell off, make revenue. You also have to use that revenue to better the lives of the people living in that country that's producing that revenue.
Well, thanks again, for this analysis. I have to bring you back to break it down again. But thanks again for speaking with us on The World Today. And while the US and Iran exchanged airstrikes, thousands of people gathered on Thursday evening to attend the funeral ceremony of slain Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, as he was laid to rest in Mashhad, northeastern Iran, following a series of memorial and funeral events held over several days across Iranian and Iraqi cities. Large crowds of mourners gathered at the holy shrine of Imam Riza, carrying portraits of the former leader and Iranian flags before performing a funeral prayer over his coffin. The ceremonies began on Sunday at the Grand Imam Khomeini Mosalla in Tehran, where thousands of people gathered over 2 days to pay their final respects. Iranian authorities said Khamenei was killed on the first day of the joint U.S.-Israeli military operation launched on February 28th. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was later named as his successor. Mojtaba on Saturday vowed to take revenge for his father, saying in Farsi, "We pledge to you that we will avenge your pure blood and the blood of all the martyrs of these two wars from the disgraceful criminal killers." In response, the US president threatened to annihilate and destroy Iran if it attempted to assassinate him. Let's take a short break now. When we return, my colleague in the United States, Maria Bird, spoke to the director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, Ambassador John Herbst. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump refuses for U.S. negotiators to return to the table with Iranian authorities over the MOU both have been trying to work with over the last few weeks. But now the tension between the two countries has escalated due to attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, leaving the U.S. and Iran and the peace agreement threatened. My colleague Maria Bird spoke with the former U.S. ambassador to the region, Ambassador John Herbst, a senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. He has served for 31 years as a Foreign Service officer in the U.S. Department of State.
Ambassador, we thank you so much once again for joining us. As we know, you spent quite a bit of time in really understanding the Middle East. And so, as we kind of are here again with escalations once again between the U.S. and Iran, specifically as a result of the Strait of Hormuz and what happened earlier in the week, tell us what actually caused this escalation. Where are we now?
I think it's pretty simple. Iran wants to make sure that ships trying to pass the Strait of Hormuz take the channel nearest their coast so that they can impose conditions. And this seems to be a clear violation of the understanding reached month or so ago, which put off all of the difficult issues between Iran and the United States, with the exception of opening the Strait of Hormuz. And as we've said from the beginning, this is not acceptable. And our fleet in the area has set up a passageway near the Omani coast, and it has moved not the full number of ships that got through the strait before the war began at the end of February, but a significant number, 30, 40, 50 ships a day. And the Iranians didn't like that. So they took shots they fired at 3 ships this past week. And this is, again, I say, a clear violation of the understanding. And the administration struck back. I think that Iran believed it had the greater leverage in the dispute with the United States, because Trump clearly wants, as he said famously last week, the week before, he doesn't want to be Herbert Hoover, meaning creating a global economic crisis.
Right.
And, he wants to make sure that he has a good position, or as good a position as he can have, going into our midterm elections in November. So I think Iran felt that, Trump feels on the run, he feels vulnerable, and therefore they could push this. But ultimately, Trump couldn't accept it. And in fact, I said that the day before we struck back, although I didn't say when we would strike back. He struck back very quickly after I said that. Not that I had anything to do with it. Anyway, so that's I think the explains where we are today. And it's possible, but I'm not saying it's certain, that the fairly strong strikes we initiated will persuade the Iranians they don't want to play this game. But I say may. I didn't say would for sure persuade them.
You make some very clear and poignant points, and we know the president on Friday was very clear to say if there's any threats on his life, that there would be some very serious consequences that Iran would experience. What does that say about where the U.S. stands today? We know there are potential negotiations happening over the weekend. Are the negotiations really meant to move forward, or is the president pretty hard standing on kind of being clear about no threats toward the U.S.?
Well, I think that certainly the United States would like to tamp down this crisis. because President Trump doesn't want to become Herbert Hoover, and that's why the MOU that was initially agreed focused only for the short term on the Strait of Hormuz. Uh, but again, Iran interpreted that as them having more leverage than Trump has. And but having said all that, Iran is cautiously trying to press its advantage. And Trump realizes that he can't have the Iranians shooting at ships taking the west side of the strait through. So he had to strike back. But that's why both sides remain interested in talking, even as their actions suggest that talking is not foremost on their minds.
As we mentioned, negotiations, what can we expect that the Iranian officials are going to come to the table to discuss? As you mentioned, that not sure if they really realized the strength and the focus and the response that the U.S. would have had so quickly. What can we expect comes out of this? And by next week, what could potentially be the movement forward? As we know, there were supposed to be 60 days toward a actual complete agreement.
Well, there's been, as best I can tell, I mean, as best anyone can tell, no serious progress on the other very important critical issues that would kick down the road, right? Iran's nuclear program, Iran's ballistic missiles, and so on. And I think certainly the White House, at least for the short and medium term, would be okay with simply making sure that the previous understanding on the Strait of Hormuz was restored and Iran stopped violating it. But Iran will need to be persuaded to do that. That's not going to happen at the negotiating table. That's why what the president did a few days ago was very important, to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is truly open without hazard to ships passing through. And given the interest of the rulers in Iran, not necessarily Iran's interest, because those two things are not the same, and given their I'd say substantial expertise in manipulating negotiations, I think we're going to have some problems in the Strait for at least several more weeks. Because even if they agree, even if Iran says, okay, we'll knock it off, and there's quiet for 10 or 12 days, then they'll probably try it again a little bit after that to see if they get away with it.
Ambassador, as we close, because it's a very clear point you're making here around the Strait of Hormuz. And so, as we think about what this really means for the U.S. economy, right? And so, that was one of the greatest reasons for ensuring the openness of the strait. What could this mean? We've seen gas prices coming down, we've seen cost of living seeming to come up a little bit better for Americans as we're in the summer season here. What could this mean? Could we be seeing an increase in gas prices again and some other challenges?
I suspect, well, we've already seen a slight increase in gas prices since the strike a few days ago. But it's an amazing thing. Given where we were before the ceasefire was announced, it's amazing that oil was only around $100 a barrel. And I think there were two reasons for that. And you have to credit Trump on this, at least. One, of course, was his very pro-U.S. energy policy, which he began as soon as he returned to the Oval Office. So we were producing and are producing a lot more oil and gas than we were under Biden, who was restricting these things in ways which I think were dangerous for the country. So we and the global market had a new supply coming from additional American production of hydrocarbons. But the second thing is a little bit less intuitive. Trump was always saying before the ceasefire, we're close. He's saying we're close to a ceasefire. I see progress here, progress there, and I think that had an impact on keeping oil prices from going even further up. So the things he was saying should not have been taken at face value as a clear description of the situation, but they were read by the market as an indication of Trump's desire to actually solve this thing without further military intervention. And I think that had a positive impact on oil prices. And I think we're probably still in the same situation now, with that tactic having having the salubrious effect of limiting the increase of oil prices.
Well, Ambassador Herbert, thank you so much. We really appreciate your on-the-spot analysis and giving us the straight information around what's going on today. So thank you so much. We really
Thank
appreciate
you. I
it.
enjoyed this. Bye-bye.
That's Diplomatic Channel this week. Don't forget to leave a comment under the video if you're watching online. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.